Sometimes the most ordinary moments hide the most extraordinary secrets. What happens when a royal guard's split-second reaction to save someone reveals a truth that could shake the very foundations of the monarchy? When duty collides with hidden identity and a simple act of protection uncovers decades of carefully guarded lies, the world watches as palace walls crumble to reveal what was never meant to be discovered. This is the story of a collapse that changed everything, not just for those involved, but for an entire kingdom watching from the shadows of secrecy. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace, casting long golden rays across the pristine marble floors. Kate Middleton walked gracefully through the East Gallery, her heels clicking softly against the polished stone as she made her way toward the state dining room. Today was supposed to be a routine charity event meeting, nothing more than another entry in her carefully scheduled royal calendar. She had woken up feeling slightly off that morning, a strange dizziness that she attributed to the busy week she'd had. 3 public appearances, 2 charity galas, and countless meetings had left her feeling drained. But Kate had learned long ago to push through such minor discomforts. The royal schedule waited for no one, not even exhaustion. As she approached the ornate doors of the dining room, Kate paused for a moment, placing her hand on the cool wall to steady herself. The palace seemed unusually quiet today, with most of the senior royals away on various engagements. Even the usual bustle of staff seemed muted, creating an almost eerie atmosphere in the normally vibrant corridors. Standing at attention near the entrance was Guard Captain James Morrison, a man who had served the royal family for nearly 15 years. He was known throughout the palace for his unwavering dedication and his ability to remain completely invisible when duty required it. At 42 years old, James had seen countless royal functions, state visits, and private moments, but he maintained the perfect balance of vigilance and discretion that made him invaluable to the security team. James noticed Kate's slight hesitation as she approached, his trained eye immediately picking up on the subtle signs that something might be amiss. Her usually confident stride seemed a fraction slower, and there was a barely perceptible pallor to her complexion that hadn't been there during her morning briefing an hour earlier. Kate took a deep breath and continued toward the dining room, determined to push through whatever was affecting her. She had learned early in her royal life that showing weakness was never an option, especially not in front of the staff. The charity representatives would be arriving soon, and this meeting was crucial for the Children's Hospital Foundation she had been championing for months. As she reached for the heavy brass door handle, the world suddenly began to tilt around her. The ornate ceiling above seemed to spin slowly, and the familiar warmth of the palace felt overwhelming and suffocating. Kate's vision blurred at the edges, and she felt her knees begin to buckle beneath her. James saw it happening before Kate even realized what was occurring. Years of training kicked in instantly, and he moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent his entire adult life protecting others. In 3 quick strides, he was beside her, his strong arms catching her just as she began to fall. The moment their eyes met as he supported her weight, something extraordinary happened. Kate's vision, though still hazy from her near-fainting spell, focused on James's face with startling clarity. Or, what she saw there made her forget entirely about her physical distress. His eyes were the same unusual shade of green-blue that she had seen in only one other place in her life. The same eyes that stared back at her from old photographs hidden deep in her mother's jewelry box. The same eyes that belonged to the man her mother claimed was just an old family friend, but whose picture was kept with a tenderness that suggested something far deeper. James felt the recognition pass between them like an electric current. For 15 years he had watched Kate from a distance, had protected her without her knowledge, had been present at every major moment of her royal life. He had told himself it was just his job, just his duty to the crown. But the truth was far more complicated and far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. As he helped steady Kate against the wall, his mind raced through the implications of what had just happened. The careful distance he had maintained, the professional boundaries he had never crossed, the secret he had guarded for over 3 decades, it all hung in the balance of this single moment. Kate's hand trembled as she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the familiar line of his jaw. "You have his eyes," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the empty corridor. James closed his eyes for a moment, knowing that his world was about to change forever. "Whose eyes?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "My father's eyes," Kate replied, her voice growing stronger despite the shock that was coursing through her system. "The man my mother said died when I was 2 years old." The silence that followed was deafening. James felt the weight of 34 years of carefully constructed lies pressing down on him like a physical force. He had always known this day might come, had prepared for it in 1,000 different ways, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of looking into his daughter's face and seeing his own features reflected back at him. Kate's mind was reeling as the pieces of her life began to rearrange themselves into an entirely new picture. The man who had died in a car accident when she was barely old enough to remember him, the father she had mourned but never really known, the empty space in her family history that her mother had always been reluctant to discuss. It all suddenly made a different kind of sense. "That's impossible," she said, but even as the words left her lips, she knew they weren't true. The resemblance was too strong, the recognition too immediate, the way her mother had always become distant whenever Kate asked about her father. James looked around the empty corridor, acutely aware that their conversation could be overheard at any moment. Palace walls had ears, and the wrong person hearing the wrong thing could destroy not just his carefully maintained cover, but potentially bring scandal upon the entire royal family. "We can't talk about this here," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "There are too many people, too many risks." Kate nodded, understanding instinctively that whatever was happening between them was too significant and too dangerous to be discussed in the open halls of Buckingham Palace. Her royal training kicked in, and she straightened her posture, smoothing her dress and checking her appearance in the reflection of a nearby mirror. "The charity meeting," she said, remembering her obligations. "I'll have it rescheduled," James replied. "You need time to process this, and frankly, so do I." As they stood there in the golden morning light, both of them realized that their lives had just taken a turn that neither of them could have anticipated. Kate had come to the palace that morning as the Duchess of Cambridge, secure in her identity and her place in the royal family. Now, she wasn't sure who she really was or where she truly belonged. James had spent 15 years perfecting the art of being invisible, of blending into the background while keeping the royal family safe. But invisibility was no longer an option when the person he was protecting was also the daughter he had never been allowed to claim. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor, and both of them instinctively stepped apart. James resumed his professional stance, while Kate composed herself with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years in the public eye. "Your Royal Highness," James said formally as two junior staff members approached. "Perhaps you would prefer to take your meeting in the blue drawing room instead? The lighting there is much better this time of morning." Kate understood the code immediately. He was offering her an escape route, a chance to avoid the questions that would inevitably arise if anyone noticed her earlier distress. "That would be perfect, Captain Morrison," she replied with equal formality. "Please make the necessary arrangements." As the staff members continued past them, Kate and James exchanged one more look. In that brief moment, an entire conversation passed between them without words. There would be time for explanations later, time for the truth that had been buried for over 3 decades to finally come to light. But for now, they both had roles to play and duties to fulfill. Kate would attend her rescheduled meeting and smile for the cameras as she always did. James would return to his post and continue protecting the royal family as he had for 15 years. The difference was that now they both knew the truth that changed everything. As Kate walked away toward the blue drawing room, her mind was already racing ahead to the questions that would need answers. How had her father, supposedly dead for 32 years, ended up as a guard in the very palace where she now lived? Why had her mother lied to her about his death? How long had he been watching over her without her knowledge? James watched her go, his heart heavy with the weight of secrets that were finally beginning to surface. He had made choices 30 years ago that had seemed necessary at the time, choices that had kept his daughter safe, but had cost him the chance to be her father. Now, as he returned to his duties, he wondered if those choices had been worth the price he had paid. And more importantly, he wondered what price would have to be paid for the truth that could no longer be hidden. The charity meeting passed in a blur for Kate, her mind completely disconnected from the discussion about fundraising targets and publicity campaigns. She nodded at appropriate moments, smiled when expected, and even managed to ask intelligent questions. But every fiber of her being was focused on the impossible revelation that had shattered her understanding of her own life just hours earlier. When the meeting finally ended and the representatives had been escorted out, Kate found herself alone in the blue drawing room, staring out at the palace gardens without really seeing them. The perfectly manicured lawns and precisely trimmed hedges that normally brought her comfort now seemed like symbols of the artificial perfection that apparently defined her entire existence. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced down to see it was from her private secretary. asking about her schedule for the following day. Kate stared at the message for a long moment, realizing that she had no idea how to continue with her normal life when everything she thought she knew about herself had just been turned upside down. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see one of her staff members. Instead, James Morrison stepped into the room. His usually confident demeanor replaced by something more uncertain, more vulnerable. He had changed out of his formal guard uniform and was wearing civilian clothes, though he still carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to military precision. "I thought you might have questions," he said quietly, closing the door behind him and ensuring they had complete privacy. Kate turned from the window to face him, and once again was struck by the unmistakable family resemblance that she had somehow missed for all these years. "I have about 1,000 questions," she admitted, "but I'm not sure I'm ready for the answers." James moved to one of the armchairs near the fireplace and gestured for Kate to join him. She sat across from him, the formal furniture suddenly feeling inadequate for the intimate nature of their conversation. "Your mother's name is Carol," James began, his voice steady but soft. "We met when we were both 19, working at British Airways. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and somehow, impossibly, she fell in love with me too." Kate felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as she listened to him speak about her parents' relationship. Her mother had always been vague about how she and Kate's father had met, offering only generic details about their time at the airline.
"We were together for 3 years before you were born," James continued.
"We were planning to get married, had even started looking at houses. Your mother was so excited about becoming a parent, about building a life together." "What happened?" Kate asked, though she was afraid of the answer. James was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I was recruited," he said finally, "by MI6. They had been watching me for months, evaluating my military background, my psychological profile, my personal relationships. They offered me a position that would require deep cover work, assignments that could last for years at a time." Kate felt her world tilt again, though this time she remained steady in her chair. "You were a spy?" "Emma spy," James corrected. "My position here at the palace isn't just about royal protection. I've been gathering intelligence on foreign diplomatic visitors, monitoring security threats, and occasionally handling sensitive situations that require someone with my particular skill set." The implications of his words began to sink in. "So when my mother thought you died, I had to disappear completely," James explained. "The assignment required a complete break from my previous life. New identity, new background, new everything. Carol couldn't know the truth because it would have put both of you in danger." Kate stood up and began pacing around the room, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of deception that had shaped her entire life. "But you've been here, at the palace, for 15 years. You've been watching me." "That wasn't part of the original plan," James admitted. "When I was assigned to Royal Protection Detail, I had no idea that you would eventually marry into the family. By the time your relationship with William became serious, I was already established in my position. Requesting a transfer would have raised too many questions." Kate stopped pacing and turned to face him. "So you've been my bodyguard, watching me, protecting me, while I had no idea that you were my father. Do you have any idea how twisted that is?" James flinched at her words, but he didn't try to defend himself. "Every day for the past 10 years has been a form of torture," he said quietly. "Watching you grow into the incredible woman you've become. Seeing you marry William, watching you become a mother yourself, and never being able to tell you who I really was." "Does anyone else know?" Kate asked. "William, the Queen, Charles?" "No one in the royal family knows," James assured her. "My handler at MI6 knows, of course, and there are a few people in the security services who are aware of my background. But the royal family has no idea about our connection." Kate felt a new wave of panic wash over her. What happens now? What happens when they find out? This could destroy everything, couldn't it? James nodded grimly. There would almost certainly be a scandal. Questions about security protocols, about how thoroughly background checks were conducted, about whether I'm qualified to continue in my position. And there would be media speculation about whether our relationship compromised royal security in any way. Kate sat back down, feeling overwhelmed by the potential consequences of their revelation. "And what about my mother? Does she know you're alive?" "She's known for years," James said, and Kate could see the pain in his eyes as he spoke. "We've had limited contact, always carefully managed to avoid detection. She's never been able to tell you the truth because of the security implications." Kate felt a surge of anger at the realization that her mother had been lying to her for her entire adult life. So everyone important in my life has been keeping this massive secret from me. My mother, you, probably others I don't even know about yet. We were trying to protect you, James said. But his words sounded hollow even to himself. Protect me from what? From knowing who my father is? From having a relationship with the man who helped create me? Kate's voice rose slightly, and then she caught herself, remembering where they were and who might be listening. James stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the same garden view that Kate had been staring at earlier. Do you remember the car accident that supposedly killed your father when you were 2? Kate nodded, though she realized she had never actually remembered the accident itself, only the stories she had been told about it. There was no accident, James said. That story was created to explain my disappearance. You were too young to have many clear memories of me, so it was easier to let you believe I was dead than to try to explain why I had to leave. Kate felt like she was hearing about someone else's life, as if the story James was telling couldn't possibly be her own history. But I grieved for you, she said softly. I used to look at the few pictures my mother kept and wonder what it would have been like to have a father. James turned back to her, and she could see tears in his eyes for the first time. Do you think there's a single day that I haven't wondered the same thing? Do you think I haven't imagined what it would have been like to teach you to ride a bike, to walk you to your first day of school, to be there when you graduated from university? They sat in silence for several minutes, both of them overwhelmed by the emotional weight of everything they had lost, and everything they could never get back.
I don't know how to process this, Kate finally said.
I don't know how to suddenly have a father after 34 years of believing he was dead. I don't know how to be a father to someone who's already a grown woman with a family of her own, James replied. But maybe we can figure it out together. Kate looked at him carefully, seeing not just the palace guard she had known for years, but the man who had given her his eyes, his stubborn determination, and apparently his ability to compartmentalize emotional chaos. What do you want from me? She asked. What do you expect to happen now that we know the truth? James considered her question carefully before answering. I don't expect anything, he said. I gave up my right to expectations when I chose my duty over my family 34 years ago, but if you're willing, I would like the chance to know you. Not as the Duchess of Cambridge, not as someone I'm assigned to protect, but as my daughter. Kate felt something inside her chest loosen slightly at his words. Despite the anger and confusion and overwhelming sense of betrayal, there was also a part of her that had always felt incomplete, always wondered what she might have inherited from the father she never knew.
This can't be public, she said finally.
At least not yet. I need time to figure out what this means for my family, for my role, for everything. James nodded immediately. Of course, we'll be as discreet as possible. And I want to talk to my mother, Kate continued. I want to hear her side of the story, understand why she made the choices she did. She loves you more than life itself, James said quietly. Every choice she made was because she thought it was what was best for you. Kate stood up again, feeling the need to move, to do something with the nervous energy that was coursing through her system. I have a public engagement tomorrow morning, she said. A school visit in Surrey. Will you be there? James nodded. I'm assigned to your security detail for the rest of this week. Kate looked at him with new eyes, seeing all the times over the years when he had been present at her public engagements, all the moments when she had noticed him in the background but thought nothing of it. How many times have you saved my life without me knowing it? She asked. James smiled slightly, the first genuine expression she had seen from him since their conversation began. A few. But that's what fathers do, isn't it? They protect their children, even when their children don't know they need protecting. As Kate left the blue drawing room that evening, she felt as though she was walking into a completely different life than the one she had woken up to that morning. Everything looked the same. The palace corridors, the familiar artwork, the staff members who nodded respectfully as she passed. But her entire understanding of her place in the world had fundamentally shifted. That night, as she lay in bed next to William, Kate stared at the ceiling and wondered how many other secrets might be hidden in the seemingly perfect life she had built. Her husband slept peacefully beside her, unaware that his wife had just discovered that her entire personal history was built on carefully constructed lies. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, and the beginning of a relationship that defied every protocol and convention that governed her royal existence. But tonight, for the first time in her life, Kate Middleton fell asleep knowing that her father was alive and that he had been watching over her all along. Kate woke before dawn the next morning. Her mind immediately flooded with memories of the previous day's revelation. For a moment, she lay still in the darkness, hoping that perhaps it had all been an elaborate dream. But the weight in her chest and the 1,000 questions racing through her mind confirmed that everything was devastatingly real. William was still sleeping beside her, his breathing steady and peaceful. Kate watched his face in the dim light filtering through the curtains, wondering how she was going to tell him that the man who had been protecting them both for years was actually her father, the father she had believed was dead since childhood. She slipped quietly out of bed and made her way to her private study, where she knew she could make phone calls without disturbing anyone. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed her mother's number, knowing that this conversation would either provide answers or create even more questions. "Kate, darling, you're up early?" Carol's voice was warm and familiar, carrying no hint that she suspected anything unusual was happening. "Mum, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth," Kate said without preamble, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Carol spoke again, her voice had changed completely, becoming cautious and careful. "What kind of question?" "I met my father yesterday," Kate said simply. The silence that followed was so complete that Kate wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, she heard her mother take a shaky breath. "Oh, God," Carol whispered. "How?" "Where?" "He's been here, Mum, at the palace. He's been protecting me for years, and I never knew." Kate's voice broke slightly on the last words. "How could you not tell me?" "Because I promised," Carol said, and Kate could hear that she was crying. "Because telling you would have put you in danger, and because I thought it was better for you to believe he was gone than to know he was alive but couldn't be part of your life." Kate closed her eyes, feeling the pain in her mother's voice like a physical blow. "Tell me everything. From the beginning. I need to understand how we got here." Over the next hour, Carol told her daughter a story that was both heartbreaking and fascinating. She spoke about falling in love with James when they were both barely adults, about the intensity of their relationship, and their plans for the future. She described the day when men in dark suits came to their flat and told James he had been selected for a special assignment. They said it was a matter of national security, Carol explained through her tears. They said he was uniquely qualified for deep cover work, but that it would require him to completely disappear from his old life. No contact, no exceptions, no matter what happened. Kate listened as her mother described the impossible choice that James had been forced to make: stay with his family and live an ordinary life, or serve his country in a way that required sacrificing everything personal and meaningful. He wanted to refuse, Carol continued. He wanted to tell them to find someone else. But they made it clear that refusal wasn't really an option. They knew about his military background, his psychological profile, his financial situation. They knew exactly how to pressure him. So he chose duty over family, Kate said, trying to keep the bitterness out of her voice. He chose to protect us, Carol corrected gently. The people he would be investigating, the organizations he would be infiltrating, they were dangerous. If they had discovered he had a family, we would have become targets. Kate understood the logic, but it didn't make the emotional reality any easier to accept. But you've been in contact with him over the years? Rarely, and always very carefully, Carol admitted. Maybe a dozen conversations in 34 years, always through secure channels. Always brief. Just enough to let him know you were safe and healthy. Did he know I was going to marry William? Did he know he would end up protecting me? Carol was quiet for a moment. He knew about your relationship with William before it became public. When it became clear that you were serious about each other, he tried to request a transfer to a different assignment. But his handler convinced him that staying in position was too valuable to the service. Kate felt a new wave of anger at the faceless bureaucrats who had manipulated her family's life for over 3 decades. So everyone was more concerned about national security than about the fact that a father was being forced to watch his daughter from a distance without being able to acknowledge her. Kate, you have to understand the world your father operates in, Carol said urgently. The people he investigates, the threats he monitors, they're not ordinary criminals. They're international terrorists, foreign agents, organized crime networks. His work has probably saved thousands of lives over the years. Kate rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. But what about our lives, Mum? What about the life we could have had as a family? Do you think there's a day that goes by that I don't ask myself the same question? Carol replied softly. Do you think I don't wonder what it would have been like if we had been able to stay together? After ending the call with her mother, Kate sat in her study for a long time, watching the sun rise over London and trying to make sense of the complex web of duty, sacrifice, and love that had shaped her family's story. She thought about the public engagement she had that morning, about the school children who would be expecting her to smile and ask questions, and represent the royal family with grace and dignity. How was she supposed to do any of that when her entire understanding of herself had been fundamentally altered? A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see her private secretary with the day's schedule. Instead, James entered the room, once again in civilian clothes. He looked like he had slept about as well as she had, which was to say, not at all. "I spoke with my mother," Kate said without waiting for him to speak. James nodded and took a seat across from her desk. "How did that go?" "She told me about the choice you were forced to make," Kate replied. "About the men in dark suits and the national security implications and the dangerous people you've been investigating." James studied her face carefully. "And what do you think about all of that?"
Kate considered the question seriously before answering.
"I think I understand why you made the choice you did. I think I can even accept that it was probably the right choice under the circumstances. But I also think I'm allowed to be angry about it."
You're absolutely allowed to be angry about it,
James agreed. "I've been angry about it for 34 years. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both of them grappling with the complexity of their situation. Finally, Kate looked up at him with a question that had been bothering her since their first conversation. "What happens now with your work, with your assignment? Doesn't this change everything?" James nodded grimly. "I've already spoken with my handler. There will need to be a full review of my position, probably some kind of reassignment. The security implications of our relationship are significant." Kate felt a pang of loss at the thought of him leaving. "Where will they send you?" "I don't know yet," James admitted. "Possibly back to MI6 headquarters, possibly overseas assignment. It depends on what they decide about the security risk." The irony wasn't lost on Kate that just as she was beginning to understand who her father was, the same forces that had kept them apart for 34 years were preparing to separate them again.
"I don't want you to go," she said quietly.
"I know that sounds selfish, given everything that's happened, but I just found you. I'm not ready to lose you again." James reached across the desk and took her hand, the first real physical contact they had shared since he caught her when she collapsed. "I don't want to go either," he said, "but we may not have a choice in the matter." Kate looked down at their joined hands and saw the same long fingers and familiar bone structure that she recognized from her own reflection. "There has to be something we can do. Some way to make this work." "The only way this works is if we're completely honest with everyone involved," James said. "Your husband, the royal family, the security services, possibly even the public eventually. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny and potential scandal?" Kate thought about William, about their children, about the carefully constructed public image that the royal family worked so hard to maintain. A scandal involving royal security and family secrets would be front-page news around the world. "I need to tell William," she said finally. "He deserves to know the truth before anyone else makes decisions about our lives." James nodded. "That's probably wise. He's going to have questions about whether this compromises royal security, whether it affects the safety of your children." Kate hadn't even thought about George and Charlotte, about how this revelation might impact their security or their understanding of their own family history. Another layer of complexity in an already impossible situation. "Will you be there today? At the school visit?" she asked. "Yes, though after today it will probably be my last assignment with your detail." Kate felt tears threatening again at the thought of him disappearing from her life just as quickly as he had reappeared in it. "Can we talk after? Properly, I mean. About what happens next." James squeezed her hand gently. "Of course. Though I suspect our options may be more limited than we'd like." As Kate prepared to leave for her public engagement that morning, she found herself looking at everything through new eyes. The palace staff who nodded respectfully as she passed, the security protocols that governed every aspect of her public appearances, the careful choreography of royal life, all of it took on new meaning when she realized how many secrets might be hidden beneath the surface. The school visit went smoothly, despite Kate's distracted state of mind. She smiled for the cameras, asked the children about their studies, and praised their artwork with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing royal engagements for over a decade. But throughout the entire visit, she was acutely aware of James standing at the periphery of her vision, professionally distant, but personally significant in a way that no one else in the room could possibly understand. During the car ride back to the palace, Kate's private secretary briefed her on the afternoon schedule. But Kate found herself watching James in the passenger seat next to their driver. How many times had he made this same journey with her over the years? How many times had he listened to briefings about her schedule while knowing that he was her father? As they pulled through the palace gates, Kate made a decision. That evening, she would tell William everything. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of figuring out how to navigate this impossible situation. But first, she needed to understand exactly what she and James were up against. "Captain Morrison," she said formally as they came to a stop. "Would you be available for a brief meeting this afternoon? I have some security questions I'd like to discuss." James met her eyes in the rearview mirror, understanding immediately that she was asking for time to talk about their situation. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. Whatever you need." As Kate walked into the palace that afternoon, she realized that her life had become a carefully balanced house of cards, and every decision from this point forward had the potential to bring the entire structure crashing down. But for the first time in her life, she also knew that her father was there to help her navigate whatever came next. That evening, Kate sat across from William in their private sitting room at Kensington Palace, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she tried to find the words to explain the impossible truth that had turned her world upside down. William was reviewing documents from his day, occasionally looking up to smile at her with the comfortable affection of a couple who had been together for over a decade. "Will," she said finally, her voice cutting through the quiet evening atmosphere, "I need to tell you something important, something that's going to change everything." William immediately set aside his papers, his attention fully focused on her. Years of marriage had taught him to recognize when Kate was dealing with something serious. "What's wrong? You've seemed distracted all day." Kate took a deep breath, knowing that once she spoke the words, there would be no taking them back. "Do you remember yesterday, when I nearly fainted in the East Gallery?" William nodded, concern creeping into his expression. "You said you were just tired. Are you feeling unwell? Should we call the doctor?" "The guard who caught me when I collapsed," Kate continued, ignoring his questions about her health. "Captain Morrison, how long has he been with our security detail?" "James? I don't know exactly. Several years at least. He's one of the most experienced members of the team." William leaned forward, clearly confused about where the conversation was heading. "Kate, what does this have to do with anything?" Kate looked directly into her husband's eyes, knowing that what she was about to say would sound completely unbelievable. "He's my father, Will. The father I thought died when I was 2 years old. He's been alive all this time, working as our bodyguard, protecting us without me ever knowing who he really was." The silence that followed was absolute. William stared at her for several seconds, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally something that looked like concern for her mental state.
"Kate," he said carefully, "that's impossible."
"Your father died in a car accident. Your mother has told us that story dozens of times." "My mother has been lying to me for my entire life," Kate replied, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil inside her. "There was no car accident. My father was recruited by MI6 for deep cover work when I was 2 years old. He had to completely disappear from his old life, including any connection to me and my mother." William stood up and began pacing around the room, his hands running through his hair in the way they always did when he was trying to process something overwhelming. "You're telling me that one of our bodyguards, someone who has had access to our home, our children, our most private moments, is actually your father who's been operating under a false identity?"
"Yes," Kate said simply.
"And that this has been going on for years without anyone in the security services knowing about the connection?"
"The security services do know," Kate explained. "At least, some of them do."
This was all carefully orchestrated. James didn't just happen to end up as our bodyguard by coincidence. William stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression now shifting towards anger. "Kate, do you understand what you're telling me? You're saying that our personal security has been compromised for years, that the safety of our family has been in the hands of someone with undisclosed personal connections." Kate felt a surge of defensiveness on behalf of James, despite her own anger at the deception. "He's protected us perfectly. He's saved my life more than once, and he's never done anything that put us at risk." "That's not the point," William said, his voice rising slightly. "The point is that we weren't told the truth. The point is that decisions about our security were made without our knowledge or consent."
Kate understood his anger. but she also felt the need to make him understand the complexity of the situation.
He didn't have a choice, Will. When he was recruited, he was told that any contact with his old life would put me and my mother in danger. William sat back down, rubbing his temples as he tried to process the implications. Have you told anyone else about this? Your mother? The Queen? I've spoken with my mother. She's known the truth all along, Kate admitted. But no one else knows yet. We have to tell my grandmother, William said immediately. And my father. This is a matter of royal security. They need to know that there's been a breach in protocol. Kate felt a chill of fear at the thought of explaining this situation to the Queen and Prince Charles. What if they decide it's too much of a risk? What if they force him to leave? Kate, they might not have a choice, William said gently, seeing the distress in his wife's face. If this becomes public, it could be a massive scandal. Questions about royal security, about how thoroughly background checks are conducted, about whether our family has been properly protected. Kate stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the gardens where their children often played. So after 34 years of being kept apart, we finally find each other, and now he has to disappear again? William joined her at the window, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. I don't know what's going to happen, he said honestly. But we can't make these decisions on our own. There are too many people involved, too many security implications. They stood together in silence for several minutes, both of them grappling with the magnitude of the situation. Finally, William spoke again. I want to meet with him, he said, tonight, if possible. I need to hear his side of the story before we decide how to handle this. Kate nodded, relieved that William was willing to at least listen before making any judgments. I'll arrange it. An hour later, James arrived at Kensington Palace in civilian clothes, looking more nervous than Kate had ever seen him. He had been summoned to private meetings with royals before, but never under circumstances like these. Never as a father meeting his son-in-law for the first time. William greeted him formally in the same sitting room where Kate had made her revelation earlier that evening. Captain Morrison, he said, gesturing for James to take a seat. Or should I be calling you something else? James is fine, James replied, settling into the chair across from William and Kate. I know this situation is unusual, to say the least. William leaned back in his chair, studying James with the analytical gaze that he had inherited from his grandmother. Unusual is one word for it. I'd call it a complete breach of trust and protocol. James accepted the criticism without defensiveness. You're absolutely right. I should have requested a transfer the moment Kate's relationship with you became serious. I should have found a way to remove myself from the situation. But you didn't, William pointed out. Why? James looked at Kate before answering, and she could see the pain in his eyes. Because it was the only way I could be close to my daughter. Because after 32 years of not being able to be part of her life, I couldn't bring myself to walk away from the chance to at least watch over her. William's expression softened slightly at the obvious emotion in James's voice. That's understandable from a personal standpoint, he said. But from a security standpoint, it's inexcusable.
I know, James agreed. And I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from my choices.
Kate looked between the two men, seeing the complexity of the situation from both perspectives. William was right to be concerned about security protocol and the potential for scandal, but she also understood the impossible position that James had been placed in. Tell him about your work, she said to James. Tell him about the threats you've identified and neutralized over the years. For the next hour, James outlined his career in intelligence work, describing assignments that had taken him across Europe and the Middle East, operations that had disrupted terrorist networks and foreign intelligence activities. He spoke about the specific threats he had monitored during his time at the palace, including several instances where his presence had directly prevented potential security breaches. William listened carefully, asking detailed questions about procedures and protocols. Despite his anger about the deception, he couldn't deny that James's record was impressive and his dedication to royal security was genuine. The question now, William said finally, is what happens next? How do we handle this situation moving forward? James straightened in his chair, his expression becoming more formal. I've already spoken with my handler at MI6. They're conducting a full review of my position and the security implications of our relationship being discovered. What are the options? Kate asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Reassignment is the most likely outcome, James admitted. Probably back to headquarters, possibly overseas. The connection between us has been compromised, which makes my continued presence a potential security risk. William nodded, understanding the logic even if he could see how much it was hurting Kate. When would this reassignment take place?
Within the next few days, most likely, James replied.
They want to minimize any potential exposure or scandal. Kate felt tears threatening again at the thought of losing her father so quickly after finding him. There has to be another option. Some way to make this work. James reached across and took her hand, squeezing it gently. The only other option would be full disclosure. Telling the Queen, telling the security services, possibly even making a public announcement. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? William and Kate exchanged glances, both of them thinking about the media frenzy that would ensue if this story became public. The headlines, the speculation, the endless analysis of every aspect of their personal lives. What would that look like? William asked. Full disclosure, I mean. James considered the question carefully. It would mean a complete review of royal security protocols. Questions about how this situation was allowed to develop, probably testimony before parliamentary committees about intelligence operations and royal protection. And personally, Kate asked, what would it mean for us as a family? It would mean that our relationship would become public knowledge, James said. That your children would grow up knowing they have a grandfather who works in intelligence. That every aspect of our past and present would be subject to public scrutiny. The three of them sat in silence, each contemplating the impossible choice they were facing. Keep the secret and lose the relationship, or reveal the truth and face the consequences of a major royal scandal. Finally, Kate spoke. I need more time to think about this, to talk to my mother, to consider what's best for George and Charlotte. William nodded in agreement. We need to be strategic about how we handle this. Whatever we decide, it has to be done carefully. James stood to leave, understanding that he had given them a lot to process. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that these past few days, finally being able to talk to you as my daughter, have meant everything to me. Kate stood as well, and, for the first time since learning the truth, embraced her father properly. I'm not ready to say goodbye again, she whispered. Neither am I, James replied, holding her tightly. But we may not have a choice. As James left Kensington Palace that evening, all three of them knew that they were facing one of the most difficult decisions any family could face. Love versus duty, truth versus security, personal happiness versus public responsibility. And time was running out to find a solution that could preserve both their family and their future. 3 days later, Kate found herself sitting in the most intimidating room in Buckingham Palace, across from Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Charles, and the head of royal security. The morning light streaming through the tall window seemed harsh and unforgiving, highlighting the gravity of the conversation that was about to take place. William sat beside her, his hand resting supportively on her arm as they prepared to reveal the truth that could potentially shake the foundations of the monarchy. James stood at attention near the door, his face professionally blank despite the personal turmoil Kate knew he must be feeling. Your Majesty? Kate began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I asked for this meeting because I need to inform you of a situation that has come to light regarding my personal security detail. The Queen's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were sharp and attentive. Please continue, Catherine. Kate took a deep breath and launched into the explanation she had rehearsed countless times over the past few days. She spoke about her collapse in the East Gallery, about the recognition that had passed between her and James, about the revelations regarding her father's true identity and his decades of service in intelligence work. The silence that followed her explanation was deafening. Prince Charles leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting between shock and concern. The head of security made notes on a pad, his face grim, as he considered the implications of what he had just heard. Finally, the Queen spoke. Captain Morrison, she said, her voice carrying the authority of 7 decades on the throne. Is this account accurate? James stepped forward slightly, his bearing military perfect despite the circumstances. Yes, Your Majesty, every word. And your superiors at MI6 were aware of this relationship throughout your assignment here? Some of them were, Your Majesty. It was deemed that the intelligence value of my position outweighed the potential complications of the personal connection. The Queen's expression tightened slightly at this information. And at what point did they plan to inform the royal family of this deception? James hesitated for a moment before answering honestly. I don't believe they had any plans to inform you, Your Majesty. The intention was to maintain the assignment until it was no longer operationally necessary. Prince Charles leaned forward, his voice tight with controlled anger. So the security of my son and daughter-in-law was being managed by intelligence services who saw fit to withhold crucial information from us. Father, William interjected gently. James has never done anything to compromise our security. His record is impeccable. That's not the point, William, Charles replied sharply. The point is that decisions about royal security were being made without our knowledge or consent. The head of security cleared his throat. Your Majesty, I've conducted a preliminary review of Captain Morrison's service record with royal protection. His performance has been exemplary. However, the protocol breach is significant. Kate felt her heart sinking as she watched the conversation move toward what seemed like an inevitable conclusion. Your Majesty, she said quietly, I understand the seriousness of this situation, but I'm asking you to consider that James has served the crown faithfully for over 15 years. His personal connection to me has never compromised his duty. The Queen studied Kate's face carefully before responding. Catherine, I appreciate the difficulty of your position. To discover that your father, whom you believe to be dead, has been protecting you for years must be overwhelming.
It is, Your Majesty, Kate admitted.
And I'm not ready to lose him again. The Queen was quiet for several long moments, and Kate could practically see her weighing the various factors involved. The potential for scandal, the breach of protocol, the security implications, the human cost of another separation. Captain Morrison, the Queen said finally, your service record speaks for itself. However, this situation cannot continue as it has been. Changes will need to be made. James straightened even further, if that was possible. I understand, Your Majesty. I'm prepared to accept reassignment. That's one option, the Queen agreed. However, I'm told there may be another possibility. Kate looked up hopefully, sensing that perhaps the Queen had found a solution that might allow James to remain in their lives. The head of the Royal Protection Unit has suggested that with full disclosure and appropriate protocol adjustments, it might be possible for you to continue in royal service in a modified capacity, the Queen explained.
However, this would require complete transparency about your background and regular oversight from both Royal Security and MI6.
Kate felt a surge of hope, but she also noticed the careful way the Queen had phrased her words. What would a modified capacity mean exactly? The head of security answered. It would mean that Captain Morrison's primary assignment would shift from direct personal protection to overseeing security intelligence for all royal residences. He would still be involved in your protection, but not as a frontline bodyguard. James spoke for the first time since the Queen had begun outlining the potential solution. Your Majesty, while I'm grateful for the consideration, I have to ask about the public relations implications. If this information becomes public— Oh, it will become public, Prince Charles interjected. We can't maintain a deception of this magnitude indefinitely. The question is how we control the narrative. Kate felt her stomach drop at the realization that her family's secret would inevitably become headline news around the world. What would that look like? The public announcement, I mean? The Queen leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. We would need to craft a statement that emphasizes Captain Morrison's distinguished service record and frames this as a touching story of dedication to duty rather than a security breach. William squeezed Kate's hand supportively. We could present it as a story about sacrifice and service, about a father who chose duty to country over personal happiness and the unexpected reunion that resulted. Kate could see the wheels turning as the royal communications team mentally began crafting the narrative that would be fed to the media. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than losing James entirely. There would still be significant scrutiny, the Queen warned. Questions about royal security protocols, parliamentary inquiries, media speculation about every aspect of your relationship. Kate looked at James, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his expression. What do you think? She asked him quietly. James considered the question carefully before answering. I think that 34 years ago I made a choice that I believed was right for everyone involved. Now I have the chance to make a different choice. The question is whether you're prepared for the consequences. Kate thought about her children, about the life she had built with William, about the public role she had taken on as a member of the royal family. Then she thought about the years she had lost with her father and the years they might still have together if they were brave enough to face the challenges ahead. I want to try, she said finally. I want to find a way to make this work. William nodded his agreement. We'll face whatever comes together. The Queen studied both of them for a moment before speaking. Very well, we'll proceed with the modified assignment and prepare for public disclosure. However, I want it understood that this arrangement will be subject to constant review. Any sign that this situation is compromising royal security or creating unmanageable public relations problems, and immediate changes will be made. James bowed slightly. Understood completely, Your Majesty. Over the next 2 weeks, the Royal Communications team worked around the clock to prepare for what they knew would be a media sensation. They crafted statements, prepared background information, and coordinated with MI6 to determine what details could be safely revealed without compromising ongoing intelligence operations. Kate spent hours with James during this period, finally having the conversations they had never been able to have. He told her about watching her grow up from a distance, about the pride he felt when she married William, about the joy he experienced seeing her become a mother. She told him about the emptiness she had always felt, not knowing her father, about the questions she had always wanted to ask, about her hopes for their relationship moving forward. They also spent time with George and Charlotte, carefully explaining that they had a grandfather they hadn't known about before, someone who had been keeping them safe without them knowing it. The children, with the resilience that Kate was constantly amazed by, adapted to the news with curious acceptance. When the official announcement was finally made, the reaction was everything they had expected and more.
The headlines dominated international news for days. Royal bodyguard revealed as Kate's father, the secret that shook the palace, 30 years of deception, the true story behind Kate's family.
There were parliamentary questions about intelligence oversight, media speculation about royal security protocols, and endless analysis of every photograph ever taken of James in the background of royal events.
But there was also an unexpected outpouring of public sympathy for a family that had been kept apart by duty and circumstances beyond their control. Kate and William faced the scrutiny with the dignity they had learned from years in the public eye, answering questions honestly while maintaining appropriate boundaries about sensitive security matters. James found himself thrust into a spotlight he had spent his entire career avoiding, but he handled the attention with the same professionalism he had brought to every other aspect of his service. 6 months after that morning when Kate had collapsed in the East Gallery, she stood in the same corridor with James beside her, no longer hiding their relationship from the world. It hadn't been easy. The media attention had been intense, the security reviews had been thorough, and the adjustments to their new normal had been challenging for everyone involved. But as they walked together toward the state dining room for a charity event, Kate realized that for the first time in her life, she felt complete. She had her husband, her children, her royal duties, and now, finally, she had her father. "Are you nervous?" she asked James as they approached the room full of donors and charity representatives. James smiled at her, the same smile she was beginning to recognize as one she had inherited from him. "I've spent 34 years pretending to be someone I wasn't," he said. "Being myself is actually much easier." Kate laughed, understanding exactly what he meant. "Ready to face the crowd, Dad?" James stopped walking for a moment, his eyes growing slightly misty at hearing her call him that for the first time in public. "I've been ready for that my whole life." As they entered the state dining room together, Kate realized that sometimes the most unexpected collapses could lead to the most important discoveries. Sometimes the people who catch you when you fall turn out to be exactly the people you've been looking for your entire life. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the secrets that threaten to destroy everything actually end up setting you free.